Populist candidate Jair Bolsonaro beat the leftist candidate in the first round of voting in the Brazilian elections. The second and final round takes place this weekend. And to discuss it, I was delighted to be joined by Filipe G. Martins. He's a political analyst specialised in forecasting and a professor of international politics. He's worked at the US Embassy in Brazil and he is the director of international affairs of PSL, which is Bolsonaro's party. First, I asked Filipe to explain how the political and economic situation in Brazil over the last 10 years helped fuel the rise of a populist candidate like Bolsonaro.
Yes, we should go way back than 10 years ago, but I know we have a little bit of time. So going back 10 years ago, or maybe 20 years ago, all we had was the left. So we didn't have any conservative movement in Brazil. We didn't have any right-wing party in Brazil. We didn't have any right-wing politician in Brazil. We had Bolsonaro, we had some other guys, but they didn't have a clear identity. And that's due to the military dictatorship. So the left used the dictatorship to shame the conservatives, to shame the political right wing in Brazil. And for decades and decades, all we had was a contest between leftists. We had PT, Partido dos Trabalhadores, the Workers' Party, and in the other case, PSDB. PSDB stands for Social Democrats. But both of them used to act on the culture, on media, to advance the diversity, the progressive agenda. So we didn't have any representation of the Brazilian right wing. And in the same time, we had a very, very conservative population. So our population is still very Catholic and Christian. We have people that are against abortion, against gay marriage, against socialism, but they didn't have any representation. And in the same time, we had a lot of corruption. So the political class here in Brazil and the entire establishment, the media establishment, the academia, editorialship, they all are leftist and very corrupt. So for a long time, we didn't have any voice. And when we had the internet, so we started to work on critics, and we start to work on means of fighting the left. And here we have to mention a guy that was key for what's going on right now in Brazil. That's Olavo de Carvalho. Olavo de Carvalho is a professor, a philosopher of thousands and thousands of Brazilians, and he we can say he is the father of the Brazilian conservative movement. So before Olavo, we didn't have anything like a right wing. Even Bolsonaro and his children say they came after Olavo and they backed Olavo's ideas, and that's why we are now having all this enthusiastic about your work and the work some other guys do in the US and in Great Britain and also in Europe. So we have a lot of demand for change and also for a creation of a conservative party that's now underway. PSL, the party I'm a director of international relations, and also the party of Bolsonaro, has elected 52 deputados, 52 congressmen. And before that, in the last election, we only had one. So we went from one deputado, one congressman, to 52. And that's a big part of the story that's going on right now in Brazil.
Now, the Western media portrayal of Bolsonaro is of this horrendous right-wing military figure who hates women and gay people. In fact, there was a big article in The Guardian on Thursday by Noam Chomsky and other intellectuals saying that Bolsonaro threatens the world, not just Brazil's fledgling democracy. They even claim his supporters were behind 70 violent attacks after the first round of voting. Just how far removed is the Western media portrayal of Bolsonaro from reality?
Well, I would say it's as far from reality as it can be. Bolsonaro is none of those things the corrupt media and the establishment media has been calling him. He's not a dictator, he's not an authoritarian figure, he's not a homophobe, he's not a bigot, he's none of those things. So I would say he's indeed a threat, but not a threat to democracy. As you know, he had an attempt of assassination. He suffered an attempt of assassination, an attempt on his life perpetrated by a left-wing activist on the eve of Brazil's Independence Day, I believe has signaled that the crime syndicate that has been running the country is in panic mode. So he's a threat to the crime syndicate. And his popularity, as you might have been seeing, he's being received in airports by huge crowds. Every time he goes on the streets, he's also received by huge crowds. Everywhere he goes, he's followed by a huge crowd. And that's due to his fight on crime, his fight against crime. His stance is to fight crime along its whole spectrum, from everyday crimes such as street robbery and rape, organized crime, which here in Brazil includes drug trafficking with all its linkings to terror networks and other criminal organizations worldwide. So here we have PCC, Primeiro Comando da Capital. It's like the first command of the capital, the first command of São Paulo, it will be. So it's a very organized crime organization that has links to Hezbollah, Hamas, and a lot of Islamic terrorist groups. And Bolsonaro has promised to face PCC and also CV, Comando Vermelho, the Red Command. So the Red Command, the name gives an idea on the ideological stance of those criminal organizations. They are linked to PT, they are linked to Hezbollah, they are linked to crime worldwide, and that's why the media has saying Bolsonaro is a threat. He's not a threat to democracy, he's not a threat to minorities, he's a threat to organized crime, to the crime syndicate.
Now we have this absolutely staggering statistic, 63,880 people murdered in 2017 alone in Brazil. Bolsonaro's promised to deal with this. He's been called an authoritarian. He's been accused of introducing a police state, or wanting to at least, to handle this. Is this massive spike in murders a more recent phenomenon, or has it been a problem in Brazil for a lot longer than that?
Oh, so if you get the statistics, you'll see the murder rate is getting higher and higher alongside with PT's rise to the power. So you have to see that it was a systematical view from the left that criminals should not be punished. So they use the judicial system. They used also the politicians to protect crime, and that comes from the links that PT has with the FARC. Are you familiar with the FARC in Colombia? So PT founded Fórum de São Paulo. It's São Paulo's forum. It's an organization created, in the words of Lula, our former president, to build in Brazil what was lost in Brazil and Latin America, to build in Latin America what was lost in Eastern Europe. So it was built between 1991, 1992, and the idea was we need to rescue communism from what was left in the Eastern Europe. So the idea was to connect all the organizations, be it parties or even criminal organizations in Latin America that was aligned with communism ideology. So it was put forward by Lula, by Fidel Castro, by Hugo Chavez, and a lot of fellas here in Latin America that had the same idea to build here a huge country that would unite Venezuela, Brazil, Cuba, all those countries, putting forward a communist ideology, a socialist ideology, to, in the end, go after the U.S. and defeat the U.S. So it was Lula's dreams, Fidel Castro's dreams, and also Hugo Chavez's dreams. And with this link to the FARC and other criminal organizations, they they built a system to protect criminals here in Brazil. And so they got to power, and criminal murder rates, also rape, robbery, they just exploded. And that's part of why Bolsonaro is so strong and so popular here in Brazil.
Now that's interesting that you mentioned the rape rate exploding and Bolsonaro having a plan to deal with that. because of course he's portrayed in the Western media as this gross misogynist, this woman hater. In fact, there was a comment he once told a congresswoman in 2014, "I wouldn't rape you because you're not worthy of it." That was his comment. But then again, 42% of women intend to vote for him. So how do we explain this supposed portrayal of Bolsonaro as this gross misogynist when he has relatively large female support still?
So starting by the declaration that he would not rape that woman because she didn't deserve it, they were actually arguing she was protecting a guy that just had raped a girl, like an entire week. The guy spent raping the girl, and then he cut her head off. And Bolsonaro was saying that that guy should go to jail, and the other congressman was saying, no, he doesn't need to go to jail. He's just a kid. He didn't know what he was doing. The guy was 17, if I'm not mistaken. And then Bolsonaro was arguing with her, and then she called him a raper. And then he said, no, I'm not a raper. And if I was a raper, I would not rape you because you don't deserve it.
Now, that's an absolutely fascinating example of how the Western media completely strips out the context, because all we've seen in the Western media is this quote on its own with zero context. "I wouldn't rape you because you're not worthy of it." They don't tell you the backstory, which you just explained, that he's literally wanting to prosecute a rapist. He's responding to an insult, the congresswoman calling him a rapist, which is a far worse insult. None of that context ever appears in the Western media when they use this quote to smear Bolsonaro as this evil, woman-hating misogynist. So that's just an absolutely fascinating example of how much they hide, how they strip out context, how they strip out meaning to demonize people for these kind of comments. And on that subject of comments that maybe have been taken out of context, there's another one about minorities, which is apparently Bolsonaro said, quote, "Minorities have to bend down to the majority. The minorities should either adapt or simply vanish." He was talking about indigenous lands in the Amazon rainforest, and this is another big controversy or criticism of Bolsonaro that apparently, and Time magazine reported on this recently as well, he wants his business associates, or he wants to pave a highway through the Amazon rainforest. How accurate is that criticism?
Yeah, so when he talks about minorities, he's not saying he will, that quote is very strong too. The minorities have to bend down to the majorities, but what he's saying actually also has a context. So when he say that, he said there's a basic point that no minority has a strength in its own. All its strengths come from the dominant class. What he was saying is diversity paradise is the absolute and unstoppable power of the dominant class and the perfect tyranny. What he was saying basically was the minorities here in Brazil only have power when they are backed by billionaires such as George Soros, such as some of our own billionaires here in Brazil, also by the establishment media. And what he was saying was, our conservative values, the Brazilian values, needed to be respected. They need to be, they need to have a place in public debate, because as I was telling you earlier, there's no place for conservatives in establishment media. It's not even like in the US where you have Fox News and other channels. We don't have any channel here that gives space to conservatives such as myself, such as Olavo de Carvalho, such as Bolsonaro. We have to go to the internet, the social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We don't have any space on establishment media. So what he was saying was, we need to respect the values of the majority. We have 91% of the Brazilians are Christians, and you don't have any Christians in the media, in the academia, and any of those establishment powerhouses. So what he was saying basically was, we are going to respect the minorities. We are going to protect the minorities, as protecting them from violence, from crime, but we need to respect the values of the majority. That was the basic point he was making there.
Now, Brazil, obviously being a Catholic country, basically outlaws abortion it's still allowed in cases of rape or whether there's a risk to the life of a mother. But recently the Supreme Court said they would consider allowing elective abortions up to 12 weeks of pregnancy. What's Bolsonaro's position on abortion?
Bolsonaro, as the entire population of Brazil, is very against abortion. So we have like 95% of Brazilians are against abortion, but the progressives try to push it with a lot of Soros money. We have a big pro-life movement here in Brazil, linked to Catholics, linked also to evangelicals. But not only evangelicals and Catholics are worried about abortion here in Brazil. We have a lot of atheists, we have a lot of people that are not even doesn't even have a religion, and that are worried about abortion here in Brazil. Soros has been putting a lot of money here in Brazil, not only to push abortion, but also to push as we call here, the gender ideology, the gender theory, pushing that on schools, pushing that on universities, pushing that on media, and we are reacting to that. That even led George Soros himself to complain about Brazil. He said, "Oh, I'm not sure what's going on in Brazil, but people there are making dangerous movements, as he called it." Because he didn't make any success in pushing abortion, pushing the gender ideology, and he even complained about that. So we have some of our judges from the Supreme Court that are very linked to Soros, and they were put there just to push abortion. So they are trying to use judicial activism to approve abortion here in Brazil, to make it right for women to abort, but no one wants that here in Brazil. So we could say it's more of a globalist agenda than a Brazilian progressive agenda.
Now there's this other big controversy in Brazil which I've read about, which is sex education for children. Obviously I'm of the opinion children shouldn't be having any sex education, at least until the age of, 12, 13, 14. Reports that children as young as 3 and 4 have been given or taught propaganda about alternative sexual lifestyles. Tell us about this controversy.
Yeah, so the perversion and the dumbing down of our kids is a big topic here in Brazil. Not only the perversion, the sexual education to children like 3 years old kids, 4-year-old kids, receiving in school what we got nicknamed here as gay kids. Bolsonaro was also very known when he was fighting the kit gay, how we call here. It was actually a set of movies that targeted children as young as 3 years old, 4 years old, and try to teach them that gay sex was okay, but not only saying that, oh, you should respect it, you should do it. So they have like cartoons showing kids how to do gay sex and things like that. So it was a big problem here. The language they used were targeted at those ages. So it was a big scandal here in Brazil. Fathers, parents went to the streets. Bolsonaro went to the Congress and made a lot of speeches, and then they canceled it, but they still push it, like hiding a lot of teachers that are aligned with the PT crowd. They take that to the classroom, and Bolsonaro has been denouncing that since forever. But it's not only the sexual education; it's also the gender education. So they try to push the idea that kids are not born women or men. They are not born male or female. They have to choose that when they reach a certain age, like 18 years old, 20 years old. So that's another big fight we have here. And also the dumbing down of our kids. If you get the statistics, we are not only killing our people, you got there, the murder rate is like 7,000 in the last year, but also we are dumbing down our kids, we are dumbing down our people, because if you get like the PISA test, that tests our capacity to read, to write, to do basic operations in mathematics, we are like in the last group. So like with countries that are much more poor than we are, And that's a big problem here too. And Bolsonaro is promising to fight that too. And that's one other motive why he's also very popular here in Brazil.
Now, expanding this out into the wider conservative movement in Brazil, BuzzFeed, of all people, not a right-wing organisation by any stretch of the imagination, had an article this week entitled "YouTubers Will Enter Politics, and the ones who do are probably going to win." I went on these channels of some of these YouTubers. They built up massive audiences, in one case over 2 million subscribers. Some of them have actually now moved into positions of power. This is the MBL movement and a guy called Arthur Mame Fale. They've had such massive success based off of social media and YouTube. Tell us how that happened.
Okay, so that has to do with the history of the conservative movement here in Brazil. As I told you, Olavo de Carvalho was the first one to create a conservative identity for Brazilian conservatives. He was not only coping, he was not only mimetizing American conservatives, British conservatives, he was creating his studies, his ideas, and spreading these ideas among young people. A lot of them went to YouTube, a lot of them went to the streets, and MBL got in the story right there. So in 2014, we had a huge electoral fight between PT and the opposition. And the PT used a lot of dirt money, crime money, and when the elections were over, people got to the streets and started protesting, asking for Dilma Rousseff's impeachment. And one of the movements that was created there was MBL, that is liberal Brazilian movement. So liberal here doesn't have the same meaning as the US, so we are talking about classical liberals. They are classical liberals. They defend free market economics. They defend the ideas of Milton Friedman and also other economists such as Mises. And MBL got in the story right there. In 2014, they created a big movement alongside with other movements such as Vem Pra Rua, Revoltados Online, and a lot of other movements that asked for Dilma's impeachment. And she got impeached like in 2016. So MBL used YouTube and the social media to channel its message. And two guys, Mamãe Falei, that is like mother, I'll tell them, that's what that means. And Kim Kataguiri got elected. They had a big vote. And I believe they are part of this larger movement. They are not part of PSL, they are not part of Bolsonaro's party, but now in the second round they are throwing all their support behind him. But I wouldn't say they are the main characters here. Bolsonaro is surely the largest character. All his supporters, like 52 of them, got elected. We even joked that Olavo de Carvalho has been doing a lot of Google Hangouts with some of these candidates, and each one of these candidates that has done a Google Hangout with Olavo de Carvalho got elected. So YouTube and social media was a big part of what's happening here.
Now, another issue impacting the Brazilian election has obviously been social media censorship. Again, Bolsonaro, an absolutely huge army on social media, on Facebook, on WhatsApp, where they're very popular in spreading their message. I call it election meddling when these big social media giants, these big corporations, ban and censor people under the justification of preventing election meddling. They're the ones actually doing it by banning these influential people. Tell us about the problems you've had, that the Bolsonaro campaign has had over this recent few weeks with social media censorship.
So from time to time, we get our accounts blocked in Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, even Bolsonaro's children themselves. One of them is a senator, and he got his WhatsApp blocked. He also got his Twitter blocked. Olavo de Carvalho got his Facebook blocked by like 30 days running on the elections. So it was a big platform for his ideas, a big platform for the defense of Bolsonaro's platform. He was just blocked. And then we complained, we went to the streets, and Facebook said, no, we can't do anything. He's spreading fake news, and they didn't have any evidence on that, any proof that he had shared fake news. He doesn't share fake news, but they blocked him. They blocked Bolsonaro's children. They blocked myself in Twitter and a lot of other accounts. So the censorship we are facing is huge because, as I explained to you earlier, we don't have any space in traditional media, in establishment media, and we put all our ideas and all our time and work in social media. But social media like Facebook, Twitter, and also YouTube has been trying to block us in every single way. So I would say if we had any meddling, it would be from those large companies, the big tech that are blocking Bolsonaro supporters.
Now, of course, Bolsonaro's in prime position to win this election in the final round of voting on Sunday. What do the latest polls say about his chances? And then how does this bode for the wider populist movement in terms of it expanding across South America and also globally?
Sure. The polls are great. Even in the first round, Bolsonaro has said he would have won if it was not for the frauds in the digital polls. So we have a very problematic system here in Brazil. I used to work for the electoral court, so I'm very familiar with the process. It's not transparent at all. The Brazilian population doesn't trust those polls, and Bolsonaro has said, oh, if there wasn't any kind of meddling, any kind of fraud, I would have won in the first round. And we believe it's true because we have a lot of videos and other proofs that there was at some extent, some fraud. For the second round, Bolsonaro is clear the favorite. He has something like 6% against 4% of Fernando Haddad, his contender. And I believe he will win. In 2016, I wrote a piece saying the second round would be between Bolsonaro and Fernando Haddad. And people say, no, Bolsonaro won't be there. He doesn't have money, and he doesn't have money. He doesn't have a party, and he indeed doesn't have a party. He doesn't have any kind of political support, and indeed he doesn't have any kind of political support. But he still got to the second round as the big winner in the first round, and now he's in the way of winning the elections here in Brazil. About the populist movement, I would say that in Brazil, people have a problem with the populist term. Here in Brazil, populism is linked with the left, more like the demagoguery, the lies the left tells to people. But I get, so the populist movement in Brazil, in South America, and also in Europe, and I'd say in the United States, people are looking for Bolsonaro. So we get a lot of messages from people from the Lega Nord in Italy. We get messages from the Kurz crowd in Austria. We also get messages from people from UKIP, the Republican Party, the Trump movement. And here in South America, people see Brazil as a huge leader, a regional leader. And so people from Paraguay, Argentina are expecting Bolsonaro to win so we can face Venezuela, so we can face the globalists, so we can defend our national sovereignties. I would say that Brazil will try to link the South America populist movement with the American populist movement. We are trying to connect with Trump and his people. We have had meetings with Bannon and people from Breitbart. We also have had meetings with people from the Lega Nord, from Kurz and other populist movements around the world. So I believe Brazil will be a large part of what's going on in the world right now, and Bolsonaro will have a special place in the history we are writing against globalists.
Okay, we'll wrap it up there. I mean, just to finish, there's so much enthusiasm. I've never seen so much enthusiasm out of a people, out of one particular country, than I have with Brazil. Just the sheer volume of messages I get across every single platform, the sheer volume of enthusiasm that pours out of that country. you know, yearning for genuine change, and it looks like that's what's going to happen, for better or worse, depending on your standpoint, when Bolsonaro takes victory in this Sunday's election.
Thank you, Paul. I believe this will be a big success in your channel. As you said, people in Brazil are very enthusiastic, and I would say that comes from our need more than any national character or anything like that. We are happy people, but we are also in need of change here in Brazil. We need to build a conservative movement. We need to build an establishment movement. We also need to build an un-globalist movement, and that's going on right now. It's very exciting. So thanks for having me. Thanks for listening to me. I believe this link between populist movements in Brazil, in the Great Britain, and the entire world is very important in this moment. So thank you for having me and listening to me.